It is now time for the Robesonian Sports Report with Chris Styles on 97.1 FM, 1340 AM, WAGR in Lumberton, covering sports for Robeson County. Now here's your host, Chris Styles.
And welcome into the Robesonian Sports Report here on WAGR. I'm Chris Styles, sports editor at the Robesonian, and here for a 30-minute look at the week that's been and what's also to come in the coming days for sports here in Robeson County. And we'll be talking a lot of UNCP basketball after their conference tournament championship, both on the men's and women's side. I'm talking to Drew Richards, the men's head coach, coming up. And then later in the show, we'll talk about kind of the specifics for both of those teams. But I want to start with the high school basketball state playoffs, which locally wrapped up last Friday night. All of our teams were eliminated by the conclusion of that round. That was the fourth round. Fairmont boys and St. Paul's girls both reached the fourth round. Fairmont's boys at the 2A level went to second seeded Goldsboro and lost 63-56. Played a pretty good game. This was a tied game with a minute left. Very tense game in a very loud and hostile environment in one of really the legendary high school gyms of Eastern North Carolina in Goldsboro. But Goldsboro ultimately finished the game on a 7-0 run after that tie game. Just kind of a poorly timed, bad minute of basketball for Fairmont, who, as I say, had played very well up to that point. Couple fouls in that span. There was a strange technical foul, and Goldsboro made a couple plays as well. Fairmont had gotten into that position after Landon Cummings had tied the game with a couple of baskets from the 2-minute mark to the 1:08 mark was when he tied the game. But those two baskets coming in that second to last minute of the game. He had 15 points. Xavier Johnson, 12 points and 6 rebounds. Isaac McKellar, 11 points. And a couple other guys contributed as well for Fairmont, including Josiah Billings at 11 rebounds. Amari Latham, the best player for Goldsboro, and he led them with 24 points. And Malik Cadet had 13. Maurice Tyler had 10 for the Cougars. This was Fairmont's first fourth-round run since 2018. Of course, that used to be a little bit more common for Fairmont, but they've not quite been as strong the last few years. But this year, with a pretty experienced group, won 22 games. This coming after they won 7 last year, so more than tripling that total this season. So certainly a great season for the seniors to go out on. They shared a Southeastern Athletic Conference championship and then ultimately beat West Bladen, who they had tied for that championship with when they met the Knights in the state playoffs back in the second round. Goldsboro advanced to the regional final where they faced Farmville Central. And Fairmont does have some key pieces coming back, even with several seniors, but Landon Cummings is coming back, Xavier Johnson's coming back. And Josiah Billings as well. So a great season for them and something to build on into the future, even as they bid farewell to a strong senior class. Here on the Robesonian Sports Report on WAGR, I'm your host, Chris Styles. Went over high school basketball locally, and St. Paul's girls reached the fourth round of the state playoffs. They were, in fact, the lowest remaining seed in any classification, boys or girls, that reached the fourth round. Fairmont boys, incidentally, were the second lowest, tied for the second lowest. But St. Paul's struggled from the start in a 66-48 loss to Seaforth. Seaforth led 25-2 after the first quarter. Coach Jamar Thompson pointing out they struggled with turnovers early in the game and kind of played the Hawks punch for punch for the last three quarters, but the hole had been dug too deep by that point. And he's right about that, in that St. Paul's outscored Seaforth 18-12 in the second quarter. The game had a 1-point spread in the second half, but that 25-2 first quarter gap proved to be the difference as Seaforth advanced and went to the regional final where they took on North Pitt. Jashonta Harris had 22 points, 5 assists, and 4 steals in her final game for St. Paul's. Zariana Shipman, 11 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 steals. And then some other contributions from the likes of Zalea Gardner. Zakoria Davis had 10 rebounds. Ava Monroe had 8 rebounds, 3 steals in this game. So the season ends for St. Paul's after its second fourth-round appearance in the last 3 years. They went to the regional final, in fact, in 2022. And then third-round appearance last year and a fourth-rounder this year. And it's the fourth straight fully played season in which they've had 20 wins. The shortened season, the winter of 2020 and 21, where it was a 14-game limit, I think, during COVID. And they won all their games that year, and then ultimately were knocked out of the state playoffs with COVID cases. But didn't win 20 games that year because they didn't play 20. But the other four fully played seasons in a row that they've won 20 games or more, and they won a shared or outright conference title now for 5 straight years. The first 3 of those under Mike Moses, and the last 2 under Jamar Thompson, who was Moses' assistant and then took over the program when he left. So certainly a perennial power here locally in the Bulldogs. And I'll note they also won twice as the lower seed in these playoffs before the loss on Friday night. So certainly accomplished a great deal and plenty to be proud of for the St. Paul's girls, even as their run comes to an end in the fourth round. Of course, you can read about both of those teams and games at Robesonian.com and in the Wednesday print edition that came out yesterday of the Robesonian. Just getting started here on the Robesonian Sports Report. Coming up after the break, we're going to talk to UNCP men's basketball coach Drew Richards after the Braves won the Conference Carolinas Tournament Championship over the weekend. That's coming up after the break here on WAGR. Back on the Robesonian Sports Report here on WAGR, and we're joined over the phone by UNCP men's basketball coach Drew Richards. How's it going, Coach?
Good. Appreciate you having me on.
Yep. Yeah, definitely wanted to talk to the Conference Carolinas champions, and you're obviously a big part of that with UNCP men's basketball leading the way. So how does that sound when I say Conference Carolinas champions 2024?
Well, I mean, we have won the regular season the last couple of years, but, the fact that I think the most satisfying thing about this year was just the way it went down. I mean, just the, off-court adversity that our team went through and just guys stepping up and fighting through, I don't think I've ever been a part of players playing almost 90 minutes in 2 days. Yeah. I mean, that's new to me. So to see them fight through that, and it kind of validates a lot of the things we do in the preseason and early that pushes guys kind of to that limit of exhaustion. And it kind of just said, all right, this is why we do that. It makes sense. So that's why it kind of makes this a little bit sweeter for sure.
Yeah, conference tournaments are hard to win to begin with, but then when you play 2 overtime games in a 26-hour span, Elijah Cobb, I think, played 84 minutes over those 26 hours. So how much more challenging physically did that make it for these guys?
Very. I mean, especially, because of how the games went. I mean, if it was a blowout or something, that'd be different. But considering, the Barton game was an OT, and Barton's a very physical team. They're very aggressive defensively. And so guys had to kind of be able to rest their bodies. I mean, we were dumping, thank gosh for our athletic trainer, Brendan, because, we were dumping bags of ice in bathtubs in the hotel at night after the Barton game and forcing guys. I mean, you never seen a 6'7", 230 guy scream quite so high-pitched before in your life. But they, trying to do everything we can to make sure we're fresh for that Emmanuel game. And then, of course, that Emmanuel game, it's probably less physical than the Barton game, but it's a lot more mentally taxing because of how good they are offensively and how good of players they have and how high IQ they do, how they run their system and stuff. So and it was a test on multiple fronts that our guys were able to find a way to get through.
And Elijah Cobb, I mentioned, he was the most outstanding player of the tournament, over 2 tournament games, 30 points, 19 rebounds, and 6 assists. And you shared a moment with him on the floor after the game. What does this mean to him specifically, and not just to be part of a championship team, but to win most outstanding player in the way that he did?
I mean, it means a lot because of what he's went through. I mean, that's kind of where the emotions came from. I mean, I know not many people know the story of how Elijah Cobb ended up at UNCP, but I mean, if you did, you'd understand why there was so much emotion associated with it as there was. And just to see that kid struggle back from the injuries and the academic issues and things that kind of were out of his control at some points during COVID, and just to see it, culminate in him being successful. And honestly, like I told him after the game, even after the press conference, I said, man, you're still not even close to as good as you can be. I mean, when you realize that you are the most talented dude and you have that attitude every time you step on the floor, now we're not talking about, conference tournament MVP. We're talking player of the year. We're talking all region. We're talking all sorts of things that you can accomplish. But seeing him be able to push his body, which, has gotten beaten up over the years to new heights and to be able to find ways to get produced and get things done. It was a lot. It was a lot of emotions associated with it. I was just, like I said, I've used the word proud a lot, but just elated for Elijah E-Man is what we call him, to be able to accomplish these things.
Yeah, and him as the defensive player of the year, guarding conference player of the year KJ Jones in the championship game. And KJ had 31, but that's kind of holding him to 31 in a sense, and especially in an overtime game. And some key stops down the stretch, too, as part of that. So how do you describe the job he did defensively?
I mean, fantastic. He did a great job the night before, too.
Yeah.
I mean, the block that he had, falling down and getting up and sprinting past everybody and getting his elbow up by the rim. I mean, just plays like that I think only one or two guys that I've ever seen, looking back on a Brandon Watts or a Kia Pruitt, but have been able to make plays like that for their team. And so, seeing that and seeing the extra effort and just, like I said, not just physically, but mentally being able to stay locked in and being able to find ways to succeed in really competitive and tight games. It was pretty awesome to see.
And your other all-tournament selections, Bradley Haskell and Nigel Verdier, obviously were productive on the floor. But in addition to that, how do you describe the leadership they've provided for this team off the floor?
Well, Nigel has come a very long way. I mean, Brad has too. I mean, Brad's maturing, and I think Brad's maturity level has increased this year. It's just a little bit slower at times than Nigel. I mean, Nigel, I think, has taken leaps and bounds in his maturity and his leadership this year. I mean, being able to pull, for a while he was kind of that guy that would pull guys together and then, turn around and kind of horse around or not be locked in the next moment. Now he's kind of holding himself accountable as much as he's holding his teammates accountable. And I don't think without Nigel Verdier's leadership, we succeed this weekend. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And I think he's really taken the bull by the horns as far as being that leader, being that guy that, can joke and stuff, but still he knows when it gets down to the nitty-gritty, he's the guy that's going to have to be talking to people. And, we got some, like Jawan Carr and Elijah Cobb are great players, but they're quiet by disposition. They're quiet. And sometimes Brad at times can be a great leader, but sometimes Brad has to be able to control his own emotions at times. So we really had this kind of vacuum where we needed somebody to step into that role. And I think this past weekend, Nigel did a phenomenal job stepping in that role and really embracing it.
Here on the Robesonian Sports Report on WAGR, I'm your host, Chris Stiles. We're talking with UNCP men's basketball coach Drew Richards. And you guys not only won the conference tournament championship, but the women's team also won over the weekend. So what does that mean for the UNCP community to have both teams be so successful and win championships this weekend?
I mean, I think it's great. I mean, obviously we've had some things going on in this community recently that aren't exactly great representations of how it is around here and how great people are. And to me, the daily day, day in, day out of our campus and our community and things. And so to be able to provide a little bit of a distraction, a little bit of a little bit of shining light with all that going on, I think is really important because, I mean, the players obviously love it here and a lot of students love it here, and the support that we're able to receive from students and the faculty and the community is just second to none. And I've coached at other places, and I can confidently say that there's no other place quite like UNCP, quite like Pembroke in the country that I've seen. So it is great. And, on top of that with the women's team, I mean, the first thing our guys did after we got off the court and cutting down the nets is we lined up like our cheerleaders, and we gave the women's team high fives on their way out to the court. So having that positive energy, having that good mojo going on for them, and then seeing John Haskins cut down a net in his last conference tournament. I mean, it's just a great environment to be a part of. It's a great story to be a part of, and I'm just glad that I was able to be just able to see it and experience it along with our players.
Yeah, you mentioned John Haskins. Describe your relationship with him as, I mean, you're the men's coach, he's the women's coach, and then also what he's meant to UNCP over these last, 35 years he's been here.
Yeah, I can't harp on when he first started at UNCP because I was barely alive at that time. But, you know, I mean, talking to people and even just even men's basketball alumnus that talk about Coach Haskins and his influence in their lives and what he was able to do in his time here. And like I said, I mean, since I've been here since 2014, he's been kind of in the same basketball suite right next door. So whether it's going over there to tell a joke, whether it's, you know, asking him how his golf game's going, or whether it's asking him how to beat a 1-3-1 zone, he's always there and he's always consistent. You know, John Haskins really doesn't have a bad day. He's always in a great mood. He's always kind to people. He's always thinking about people over himself, and he's just a phenomenal guy. So I mean, as much as I'm going to miss him, sitting right, you know, his office being right next to mine, I'm also extremely happy that I know he's not going to miss me as much when he's sitting on that beach watching the waves go in and out.
And the NCAA tournament coming up for you guys, so it'll be Catawba in the first round. What's kind of a initial basic scouting report on them?
You know, they're big and strong and athletic. They play like a combination of a way of like three teams from our league. They offensive rebound like kings. Offensively, they're closer to what a Francis Marion is with having very talented individual pieces. And then defensively, they're kind of like Barton. They thrive off turnovers. They thrive off steals. I think they're third in the nation in steals per game. And so, you know, I mean, their last game where they played Lincoln Memorial, which everyone knows that they're a perennial power in this region, I think they turned Lincoln Memorial over like 25 times. So Catawba has that. They play extremely fast, extremely hard when they get out and transition off turnovers. So, I mean, we're going to have as good of a ball handling, passing, mental focus on team execution as we've had all year to have a shot against them.
And this postseason, you've kind of knocked down one, quote-unquote, haven't yet, in that you won a conference tournament title for the first time in your head coaching tenure. So now going into another one, haven't yet advanced to a regional final or beyond. So how can your guys do that this weekend?
It's just really focusing on today. I mean, we've been pretty beat up from Sunday after playing guys a million minutes. So, you know, we took Monday off. Yesterday we did a very light day when it came to recovery lift and getting some shots up and stuff. So today's kind of our first day back of legit team practice. So we're going to focus on getting better today and trying to find ways to improve, but not overwork these guys to where they're not prepared legs-wise going into the weekend. But it really is, if you want to succeed in postseason, ultimately it's how can your guys stay engaged. You know, we talked about in the locker room at one point, we talked about we want one more practice. If you can have one more practice in this time of the year, you're doing something right. So luckily we were able to find a way to have one more practice. So when we get through today, let's have one more practice tomorrow. Let's use that leading up to this weekend.
And looking back to your playing days at Missouri State, no NCAA tournament appearances, but 3 times in the NIT, and then certainly the Missouri Valley Conference tournament at that league's peak. Describe, for those of us that have never played high-level college basketball, what is March basketball like as a player inside the lines?
Thanks for bringing that up. No, it's you know, back then the Valley was incredible. I mean, you had like Anthony Tolliver on the Creighton, who's still in the NBA to this day. You had Patrick O'Brien at Bradley. I mean, you had Ben Jacobson at Northern Iowa, like the player, not the coach. And you just, I mean, it was crazy. We were getting 5 or 6 bids a year. We were, at one point, one of those years that I was at Missouri State, we were ranked above the Big 12 in RPI. I mean, it was just insane how tough it was night in, night out. You know, and I told our guys, one of the things I told them is, you know, you never want to be on the bubble on Selection Sunday and not feel good about the chances of getting in the tournament, because my sophomore year, we were 21 RPI. We're still the highest RPI to never achieve a NCAA tournament bid to this day. And we were sitting there on CBS Sports across the entire country and didn't get chosen for the NCAA tournament. And that's a horrible feeling to have.
Yeah.
So, and we had some really special teams. I think we averaged 20 wins a year in the 4 years that I got to play at Missouri State. And like I said, the Valley those years, I mean, we were beating we were beat. I mean, we beat Wisconsin, who was, I think, fourth in the nation one of the years I was at Missouri State. I mean, we were playing and beating some of the best teams in the country in the Missouri Valley that year. So, I mean, it was a physical. It was kind of like Big Ten light. I mean, it was a physical, slow pace kind of skilled IQ type basketball. That was like I said. Every night you step up, you'd be on ESPN, and you'd have to be ready to play, or you're going to get embarrassed.
UNCP coach Drew Richards, thanks for joining us here on the Robesonian Sports Report.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Appreciate you.
Yep, and we'll be right back after this. Back on the Robesonian Sports Report here on WAGR, and here in the last segment, want to talk about UNCP basketball, as we've often done on this show in the last segment, but certainly want to talk about it this week with the men's and women's programs both winning the Conference Carolinas Tournament Championship over the weekend in Spartanburg. And a great event the conference puts on, first of all. I was there Saturday and Sunday, and certainly a great experience for UNCP in that they came out as the victors in both events. And I wrote in a column that was in today's paper that one of the striking images, at least for me, was the women were about to cut the nets down, and they said, hold up, we got to wait a second, and we're going to go over here and take a picture with the men's team so that they could both celebrate together and kind of commemorate this accomplishment they had both achieved in both winning the tournament. So for the Braves men, 2 overtime games in the tournament, defeated Barton 79-73 in the semifinals and beat Emmanuel 82-81 in an absolute classic game in the championship game. That was the top 2 seeds in the tournament, going back and forth for 45 minutes. The team played, we talked about this with Coach Richards, 90 minutes of basketball in about a 26-hour span. Elijah Cobb, who was named Most Outstanding Player, he played 84 minutes of that, which was the most on the team. And Sunday's game, he had 22 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists. Really, I mean, he was the best offensive player for the Braves on Sunday. He's been their best defensive player all year. He was Conference Defensive Player of the Year. Bradley Haskell and Nigel Verdier also earning all-tournament selections. Haskell had 24 points over the 2 tournament games combined. 24 points on Saturday, and he had 12 on Sunday. Verdier had 17 points on Saturday with 7 rebounds and 18 points on Sunday. So all 3 of these guys eclipsed 30 points for the 2 tournament games combined. And Elijah Cobb had 19 rebounds and 6 assists to go with that. He made a big block, Cobb did, late in both of the wins. He had a big one down the stretch in Saturday's game that Coach Richards was describing, where he kind of he had gone down to the floor on the Braves' offensive end of the floor as the play went the other way, kind of got up, ran back, and ran down the play, and hurdled, maybe too strong of a word, but kind of jumped halfway over Nigel Verdier to block the shot attempt that was being made. And then in Sunday's game, had a big block of a potential go-ahead shot with 10 seconds left in the game by Emmanuel's KJ Jones, who was Conference Player of the Year. He, quote-unquote, held KJ Jones to 31 points. You don't often use the word held when you're talking about somebody that scored that much, but KJ capable of going for 40-plus any given night, and in a 45-minute basketball game, not just 40, certainly had some opportunities to score more than he did. And the UNCP team got the stop on the last possession as KJ Jones had a good look that would have given Emmanuel the lead. And Juwan Carr got a key rebound there. Nigel Verdier had given the Braves the lead with a go-ahead layup with 14 seconds left there in the overtime session. So next up for UNCP is the NCAA tournament. They're a 5 seed in the Southeast region. And we'll take on number 4 Catawba in the first round. The regional being played at University of North Georgia in Dahlonega. And Catawba is a frequent non-conference opponent of the Braves, although they did not play this season. But UNCP has won 3 straight meetings. They met in the 2019 NCAA tournament, won by Catawba. They were actually, as a kind of a bit of forgotten history, if you will, they were supposed to meet in the 2020 NCAA tournament before it was canceled when COVID-19 hit the U.S. And Catawba has 3 double-figure scorers and an experienced backcourt. Javion Jones leads the way at the point guard position for them, 13 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. D'Angelo Epps scoring at 11.5 per game, and Chris Robinson scoring 11 per game. And then in the front court, Peyton Gerald scoring 9.5 per game, and Justin Banks 9 points, 5 rebounds per game. So some depth on this Catawba team, and they score 87 points per game. They make 7 threes per game. So a good offensive team. They don't have anybody averaging more than 5 rebounds, but collectively a good rebounding team. And Coach Richards mentioned a good offensive rebounding team. So we'll have to see what happens in the first round of the NCAA tournament when the Braves and Catawba meet. That's Saturday at 7:30 in Dahlonega, Georgia. Here on the Robesonian Sports Report on WAGR, I'm your host Chris Stiles, sports editor at the Robesonian. And shifting to the women's side, where the Lady Braves also won the Conference Carolinas tournament, doing so for the second straight year. They beat Barton in the semifinals, 63-56, and then kind of a surprise blowout in the championship game of Belmont Abbey, who they also beat last year in the final. It was a 72-51 game. The Braves hit a program record 15 three-pointers in that game to pull away from Belmont Abbey. This after I mentioned the Barton game on Saturday. Clay Hall scored 25 points, and Courtney Smith had 12 in that game. And that was kind of a game where they pulled away late for that 7-point win after it had been back and forth throughout. And in that game Sunday with 15 three-pointers, Kalea Hall and Kelsey Adams each hit 4 of those. Hall had 50 points for the tournament over 2 games, 10 rebounds, 5 assists, and 7 steals also over those 2 games. She becomes the first back-to-back most outstanding player of the Conference Carolinas tournament since Anderson University's LaShonda Childs did it 3 straight years back in the mid-2000s. All tournament selections for the Braves also included Kelsey Adams, who scored 17 points over 2 games. 14 of those were in the second half of the championship game. She'd been cold to that point, but certainly found her shot in the last 20 minutes of the tournament. And then Courtney Smith had 18 points over the 2 games and earned all tournament honors as well. And then arguably an all-tournament snub, if you will, in Zaria Clark, who had 20 points and 11 rebounds over the 2 games of the tournament. So UNCP winning back-to-back titles. It's the first time since Limestone won 3 in a row from 2014 to 16 that anyone's done so in Conference Carolinas women's basketball. And sends out this strong senior class: Kalea Hall, Courtney Smith, Anaya McManus, Lillian Flantos, and Alcina Purnell with another conference title, as well as Coach John Haskins, who's retiring at the end of the season. He had never been to the NCAA tournament in 29 years combined as a head coach with the men's and then the women's program until last season. Now he gets to, however it goes, he will end his career in the NCAA tournament, whether it's a first-round loss or whether they can make a run as he goes out this season. So they're an 8th seed in the NCAA tournament and play the number 1 seed in the Southeast region, Catawba. Catawba hosting the regional as the top seed, so that's where the games will be, both in the first round and then if the Braves can win beyond the first round. It's the same matchup from last year when UNCP went up 9-0 the first couple minutes of the game against the Indians, but then didn't make much of anything the rest of the night, and Catawba went on to win comfortably. That's a game that would have been more of a game if some shots had fallen for the Braves. Catawba went on to reach the national semifinal last season, and most of that team is back this year. They did play in December. Catawba won up there in Salisbury 66-61. Zaria Clark had 28 points in that game for UNCP. Kalea Hall had 13. And then for Catawba, Lyric Thorne had 22 in that game with 4 assists. Janiyah Downs had 17, and Nala Baker had 14. This is a high-powered team, 77 points per game for the season. But then UNCP, one of the best in the nation in scoring defense. So it'll be an interesting matchup there to see kind of which side prevails. Lyric Thorne averaging over 20 points per game this season, 4.5 rebounds, 5 assists. Janiyah Downs, her backcourt mate, with 12.5 points, 6.5 rebounds, 2.5 assists. And then on the inside, Sarah McIntosh, 11 points and 5.5 rebounds per game. These are all grad students, so a very experienced Catawba team and one that's had some tournament success, as I mentioned last year. So a tough draw for the Braves. Somebody texted me and said, hey, tough draw for them. I said, well, you play number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. That's what you're going to get. But one that I think that can certainly stay in the game, if not have a chance to win it, if UNCP plays well, and this coming off really its best game of the season Sunday in the Conference Carolinas Tournament Final. So you can check out content on UNCP and on high school basketball at Robesonian.com and the print edition of the Robesonian. Also, all district selections for basketball, and we'll have all conference and all county selections both coming up soon as well. And then spring sports are underway here locally, baseball, softball, and girls soccer at the high school level, and then baseball, softball at UNCP as well, and women's golf as well. So check all that out on Robesonian.com and in the print edition of the Robesonian. Thank you for joining us here on the Robesonian Sports Report. For Paul Matthews behind the scenes, I'm Chris Stiles, sports editor at the Robesonian. Thanks to Drew Richards for joining us as well. And we'll see you next week here on the Robesonian Sports Report.